Arizona Territory, May of 1879, the sun was still climbing when she fell. Natalia Prescott collapsed before the whitewashed steps of St. Jude's Church in the dusty town of Chenega Wells. Her dress was soaked through with sweat, her lips split and dry. She had walked for miles, maybe more, holding on to nothing but the names of her children and the hope that someone here might help. Her knees hit the ground hard. Her body folded, arms limp at her sides. The world spun, blurred, darkened. She did not see the cowboy who stepped down from his horse just across the road, but he saw her. "Someone help," the man shouted, already crossing the street, boots pounding dry earth. "She's down." No one inside the church had heard. The doors were closed. The bell stayed still. He dropped to his knees beside her. "Miss," his voice was gentle. "Can you hear me?" She stirred just enough to groan, her fingers twitching over the dirt. Her skin was burned pink from sun, her face streaked with tears and dust. The cowboy reached behind him for his canteen. He uncorked it quick and lifted her head with one hand. "Easy," he said, tilting the water to her lips. "Just a sip." She drank like she had not tasted water in days. "Name's Lawson Whitlow," the cowboy said as she opened her eyes. "Can you tell me yours?" Her voice cracked. "Natalia." He waited. "Natalia Prescott," she whispered. Lawson nodded, steadying her with one arm. "You made it, Miss Prescott. You're safe now." She blinked at him, dazed. "Are you with the church?" "No, ma'am," he said. "Just passing through. But I reckon I can do more for you than the church can today." He helped her sit up against the steps, then looked down the quiet street. "You got kin here?" She shook her head weakly. "I was looking for the mission. They said," her voice trembled. "They said they taken children." He frowned. "Children? My son and daughter," she said, pressing a hand to her chest like she could still feel them there. "Sarire is 5. Sela's just turned 3. I left them with a woman in Tucson. I had no money, no food. I thought if I found help, I could go back." Lawson's jaw tightened. He looked at her, really looked. Her dress used to be blue. Now it was torn, faded, stained with travel and grief. Her boots were worn through. She had come through hell, and she had done it alone. "You walked here from Tucson?" he asked. She nodded. "Took me 6 days. I begged rides when I could." He stood. "Come on," she blinked up at him. "Where? Doctor first, then food, then we talk about the rest." "I do not have money," she whispered. He gave her a look that stopped her heart for a second. "I did not ask for that," he said. He carried her to his horse, lifted her gently into the saddle, and climbed up behind her. He rode slow through town, one arm around her waist to keep her steady. Folks stared, but he did not care. He took her to the local doctor, an old man who looked like he had seen worse but still shook his head when he saw her feet. "Blisters, heatstroke, starvation," the doctor muttered. "She needs rest, at least a week." Lawson stayed by her side. He brought her food from the diner, sat next to her while she slept, and cooled her forehead with a damp cloth when the fever came. She woke the next morning to his voice, low and soft, reading a page from a worn book in his lap. She stared at him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" He looked up and met her eyes. "Because no one did when my sister needed help," he said, "and I swore I would be that man if I got the chance." Natalia turned her face away. "I do not deserve that." Lawson leaned forward. "You walked 6 days through desert for your children. I think you deserve more than you have ever been given." She did not speak for a long time. Then, quietly, they were left with a widow, Mrs. Elkins. "She is kind, but she has 5 children of her own." "I do not know how long she will keep mine." Lawson stood. "Then we go get them." Natalia looked up, startled. "What, you rest today? Tomorrow I get a wagon, and then we ride to Tucson." But he knelt in front of her, his voice low and sure. "You are not alone anymore." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. They left 2 days later. She was still weak, but stronger with food and sleep. He drove the wagon, letting her lie beneath the canvas to stay out of the sun. By the 4th day, she was sitting beside him, hands resting in her lap, her voice stronger. "Why Chenega Wells?" he asked one night as they made camp. She stared into the fire. "It is the last place my husband ever spoke of. He died 2 winters ago. Fever." Said he heard of a mission there that helped widows. Lawson's jaw tightened. "He leave you with anything?" "Debt," she said. "And a broken fence." He nodded. "You still wear the ring?" She looked down at her hand. "No," she said. "I lost it last summer. It slipped off when I was washing clothes in the river. I did not go back for it." Lawson said nothing. But he watched her as she leaned back against the wagon, her face catching the firelight. They reached Tucson the next morning. The Elkins homestead sat on the edge of town, a crooked fence around a patch of dry land. Natalia stepped down from the wagon with shaking hands as a little girl burst from the porch and flew into her arms. "Mama," Saraya, Natalia sobbed, holding her tight. A smaller boy came stumbling after, his arms wide. "Mama," she dropped to her knees and pulled him in two, kissing their heads, whispering their names over and over. Lawson stood back, his hands in his pockets, his heart twisting in his chest. Mrs. Elkins came out, wiping flour from her hands. "I was starting to worry," she said. "But I knew you would come." Natalia looked up at her, tears still on her face. "Thank you, I will never forget." "No need," the older woman said. "You got them now, take them home." Natalia turned to Lawson. I do not have a home." He looked at her, then at the children clinging to her skirts. "Yes," he said, "you do." The wagon creaked steady over hard-packed earth, the wheels carving pale lines through the mesquite flats east of Tucson. Natalia sat beside Lawson, her children nestled behind her in a bed of quilts and flour sacks. Saraya hummed quietly, her braid brushing her brother's shoulder as he clutched a wooden spoon like a toy soldier. Natalia watched the horizon, sun hanging low and dust rising in soft spirals from the horse's hooves. Her hands were folded tight in her lap. She hadn't asked where they were headed. It didn't matter, not yet. The weight of her children's warmth was enough for this hour. Lawson shifted the reins, voice low. "I've got a claim north of Bisbee. Water's shallow but clean, 2-room cabin, stubborn goat, you'd have your own space." She glanced at him. "You live alone," he nodded once. 4 years now." She let that settle. "You built it with my brother before he left for Colorado. He wanted silver, I wanted quiet." Saraya's voice floated from behind them. "Mama, what's a claim?" "A place a man works with his hands," Natalia said, her voice wrapped in warmth. "And protects with his heart." Lawson turned his face slightly away, but not before she saw the flicker in his eyes. They reached the cabin by dusk the next evening. It stood between 2 low hills, half sheltered by a cottonwood that leaned westward like it had grown tired of standing straight. The roof sloped unevenly, patched with tin. There was a split-rail fence circling a narrow pasture, and a line of laundry danced on a rope near the back. Saraya clapped softly. "It's not small." "No," Lawson said as he helped them down. "It's just enough." Natalia stepped onto the porch, her fingers brushing the doorframe. The children ran ahead, their laughter scattering birds from the eaves. She turned to Lawson. "How long did it take you to finish it?" "Still not finished," he said. "But it holds when the wind comes." Inside, the front room smelled of cedar and ash. A cookstove sat in the corner beside a shelf of tin dishes and a bundle of dried rosemary tied with twine. There were 2 cots against opposing walls. One held a neat stack of quilts. The other had a washbasin at its foot. "I'll sleep in the barn till I can add on," Lawson said. "You'll be warm in here." Natalia stepped across the threshold. Her boots left faint prints on the worn pine floor. "I can sew," she said. "And mend, I've done it for years." He nodded. "I've got a pile of shirts that'd thank you." She turned, hands on her hips. "And I can cook better than whatever you've been living on." "Most things taste better than dry beans and bad coffee," he said, her gaze held his. "Then I suppose we'll get along just fine." The next morning, Natalia rose before the sun. She stoked the stove to life, found cornmeal in a tin, fried cakes in bacon grease. Lawson came in from the barn with his sleeves rolled and his hair damp from the pump. "Smells better than anything I've had in a year." She handed him a plate without a word. The children were still asleep, curled up like kittens beneath the quilt. After breakfast, he took them to see the goats. Natalia watched through the window as Saraya gathered courage to pet the largest one. Lawson crouched beside her and pointed at its ears. Sila's clung to his leg, steady and small. That night, after the children were washed and laid down, Natalia stepped outside. The stars spilled heavy above the ridge. She found Lawson leaning against the fence rail, a match between his fingers. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't turn. "You don't have to say that." "I do," she said. "You didn't have to do any of this." He looked over at her then. "I didn't do it out of duty." She wrapped her shawl tighter. "Then why?" His voice was low. Because I saw a woman who hadn't been looked after in a long time, and I wanted to be the one who did. She didn't speak. The air smelled of dry grass and wood smoke. Somewhere, a nightbird called once and fell quiet again. Lawson straightened, brushed dust from his palm. I'll build the frame for the new room next week. Should have it done before the heat gets ugly, she nodded. I'll help where I can, he hesitated. I don't expect anything from you. I know, she said, but I want to. He held her gaze. Then we'll be even, she smiled, faint and tired. Not even, but closer than I thought I'd ever get. He tipped his hat. Good night, Natalia. Good night, Lawson. She stepped back inside, closed the door behind her, and for the first time in a long while she slept without dreaming of empty rooms. By late June, the monsoon clouds had started to gather low over the Mule Mountains, hanging heavy with the promise of relief and ruin. The days remained dry, but the scent of rain threaded the wind, mingling with the tang of mesquite smoke and the sweet rot of overripe cactus fruit. Natalia stood beneath the porch awning, a spool of thread tucked into her apron pocket, her gaze fixed on the edge of the south field where Lawson worked the post-hole digger into stubborn earth. He moved slow and steady, shirt damp along the back, his hat casting a long shadow across the brass of his brow. Every few minutes, he'd stop to wipe his face with the edge of his sleeve, then keep at it. At her side, Saraya crouched with a handful of pebbles, arranging them into a circle around a beetle. Silas napped on a flour sack inside, cooled by damp rags over the window slats. Does he always work like that? Saraya asked without looking up. Natalia brushed a strand of hair from her temple. Only when something matters to him. Saraya considered that, then stood. I want to help him. Natalia caught her hand gently. You will. When the time's right. That evening, after supper was cleared and the children lay in their cotton shifts beneath the patched ceiling, Natalia stepped outside barefoot, the boards warm under her soles. The last of the sunlight painted the ridge in rust and rose. Lawson sat on the split stair, sharpening a drawknife in slow, even strokes. She eased down beside him. You'll wear that blade thin. It's been dull since before you got here, he said. I've just been putting it off. She rested her forearms on her knees. You put off much, he answered without pause. Only things I think won't matter. That list's shorter these days. The knife slowed. The air pulsed with low-cussed hum. You ever think about leaving here? She asked. He set the blade aside. I used to. Thought maybe I'd head east, see the Mississippi, but I never did. Why not? His voice came quiet. Didn't have a reason to stay gone. Natalia turned toward him. And now, he looked at her, steady-eyed. Now I've got reasons I never expected to find. She didn't speak right away. The stillness between them wasn't heavy. It breathed. I've never had a man ask what I wanted, she said finally. Not really. He didn't flinch. What do you want? She folded her hands. A place that stays, where I can plant something and know it'll grow. Where my children don't have to guess what home means. You've got that now, she nodded slowly. And you, he rubbed a thumb along his jaw. I want to wake with the sound of a skillet and the smell of coffee. I want boots by the door that don't belong to just me. And I want to come in from the field and see someone waiting who's not just passing through. Her throat caught. You're not afraid I'll leave? No, he said. You already walked too far for that. They didn't touch, but the space between them softened. The next day, Natalia found a patch of wild onion blooming along the creek bed. She brought them back in a tin cup and set them on the sill. The room filled with their clean, sharp scent. Lawson noticed them that evening. You pulled those yourself, she nodded. They remind me of the garden I had once, before, he stepped closer. You could build another. I was thinking of planting near the barn. There's good slope for runoff. I'll dig the rows, he said. You just tell me where. Later that week, Natalia took Saraya and Silas with her to the trading post in Bisbee. It was the first time she'd left the homestead since arriving. She returned with calico remnants, a tin of molasses and a bar of lye soap. Lawson met her at the wagon. Didn't expect you back before dusk. I knew he'd fret about the goat, she said, lifting Silas down with one arm. She's half blind and chews fence rails. Thought she might try to follow you. Natalia laughed, and it was a sound that turned his chest warm. That night, as the children slept and the fire in the stove burned low, Natalia sat across from Lawson at the table. her needle moving slow through a patch of muslin. He worked a small block of cedar into shape with the drawknife, smoothing each edge with care. Without looking up, she asked, "Was your sister older or younger?" He paused. "Younger, 2 years, name was Clara, she the one who needed help," he nodded. "She was 17, married a man who liked his drink more than his work." "I didn't find out until it was too late to do much." Natalia's voice was gentle. "What happened?" "She lost a child, then him, then herself in pieces." "I'm sorry," he set the cedar down. "She was kind. Thought the world would change if she just loved it hard enough." Natalia placed her stitching aside. "Maybe it does, just not on our schedule." Lawson looked at her. "You believe that?" She met his eyes. "I want to." He reached across the table, his hand closing around hers. "Then let's build something that holds," he said. And she knew it wasn't a question. By early July, the garden behind the barn had begun to take root. Natalia crouched low between rows of sprouting beans and summer squash, her palms dark with soil. The children played nearby with a pair of smooth sticks Lawson had carved into pretend horses, their voices rising and falling with imagined races and journeys. From the corner of her eye, she saw Lawson approach with a wooden crate balanced on one hip. He set it down near the fence, the scent of split cedar rising as he opened the lid. "Brought back some nails and oilskin," he said. "Postmaster in Charleston had extra, said he'd been holding them for someone who never came back." Natalia wiped her hands on her apron. "What are you planning?" He gestured toward the shed. "Roof's near giving up. Figured I'd patch it before the next storm." She stood and dusted off her skirt. "You'll need another set of hands." His gaze met hers. "I was hoping you'd say that." They worked in the late light, boards creaking beneath their steps as they moved across the shed's slanted top. He passed her nails, and she held each in place while he drove them in steady. Sweat gathered at the base of her neck, and her arms ached by the time they finished, but when they climbed down together, she looked back at the roof and nodded with quiet satisfaction. "You ever fix anything before?" he asked, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "Not roofs," she said. "But I rebuilt a wagon axle once, with a spoon and a bootlace." He gave a low chuckle. "That's so, it got us home," she said. That night after supper, Natalia sat on the porch with her feet in a basin of cool water. The children had fallen asleep early, worn out from chasing lizards and dragging a sack of pebbles around like treasure. Lawson joined her with a tin mug in hand and settled into the chair beside her. "You think you'll want to stay come winter?" he asked. She leaned her head back against the wall. "I've thought about that." And she ran her fingers through the basin water slowly. "I was always made to feel like I didn't belong. In my husband's family, in the towns we lived in, even in my own skin some days. But here, the quiet doesn't press in on me. It lets me breathe." He nodded, but didn't speak. "You said your brother went to Colorado," she continued. "You hear from him still?" "Once last year," Lawson said. "Said he'd struck something promising, but the letter was short." "He was never much for writing." "Do you miss him?" He stared out over the pasture. "We never saw the world the same way, but there were nights after he left when I'd sit at this porch and listen for someone else's steps. You get used to silence, but you don't stop hearing it." Her voice softened. "You don't need to be alone anymore." He looked at her then, and something in his expression shifted, not sudden, just steady like a gate swinging open after holding fast through too many seasons. "I know," he said. The next morning, Natalia found a cloth-bound book on the table with a pressed yellow flower marking one of the pages. She opened it slowly. The margins were filled with sketches tools, fence lines, the bent shape of an old pine down near the creek. Lawson's handwriting was neat and spare. On the inside cover, he had written, "If ever you need to remember what grew." She traced the words with her thumb, then tucked the book into the drawer beside her mending later that week. As they shelled peas on the porch, Saraya turned to Lawson. "Are you our uncle now?" Natalia's fingers stilled, but she didn't look up. Lawson tipped his hat back slightly. "No, little one." "Then what are you?" He glanced at Natalia before answering, his voice even. "I'm someone who wants to be here with all of you. For as long as you'll let me." Saraya considered that for a moment, then nodded. "That's good." That evening, after the dishes were washed and the lantern trimmed low, Natalia stepped into the barn. Lawson was brushing down the mule, its flanks dappled from the day's heat. She waited until he finished and turned toward her. "I read your note," she said. He nodded once. "Didn't know how else to say it. You've said it in every nail you've hammered, in every mile you drove that wagon. But I'm glad you wrote it all the same." He stepped closer, the dust between them silent. "I've been waiting for you to say what you want." She didn't hesitate. "To stay, to make this ours." His hand cupped the side of her face, calloused and warm, and she didn't flinch. "I want to marry you, Natalia," he said. "Not for duty, not for the children, but because you are the strongest thing I've ever seen, and I want to spend my days building something worthy of you." She leaned into his palm. "Then ask me again." He did, and her yes came quiet but certain. Like the first rain on dry land, the wedding was small. No preacher, no pews, just the wide sky over the eastern ridge and a cottonwood tree that had withstood more years than any man still breathing. Sarai collected wild asters from the creek bank and wove them into her mother's braid. Silas held a carved stick between his palms like a candle and stood solemn as a deacon while Lawson tied a strip of muslin around Natalia's wrist and then his own. They spoke their promises plain, without flourishes. Words that had weight because they'd already been lived. When Lawson said he'd carry what she could not, Natalia's eyes stayed dry, but her hand tightened around his. Her yes was quiet, and she didn't need to say it again. Afterward, they shared bread and stewed peach preserves at the table inside, and Natalia let the children stay up past sundown while Lawson played a tune on a mouth harp he hadn't touched in years. The sound was a little off, but no one minded. That night, when the house had gone still and the lamp burned low, Natalia stood barefoot near the window, watching the wind stir the garden rose. Lawson came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. She leaned into him without hesitation. "You know," she said, "I never pictured anything like this." He kissed the curve of her neck. "Me neither. I thought if I ever married again, it'd be for the sake of the children, or because I couldn't manage on my own, but this." Her voice was soft but steady. "This was a choice." Lawson turned her toward him. "You chose me," he said. "I did." Her hands slipped up to his collarbone, "and I'd do it again." He brushed his lips against her forehead. "Then that's the only thing I'll ever need to be sure of." The months that followed were quiet in the way good things often are. The added room went up by August. Natalia whitewashed the walls and stitched curtains from old flour sacks, letting the breeze move through them like breath. Lawson built a narrow writing desk from pine for her, and by harvest, she'd filled 3 pages of a small journal with notes on the garden, the weather, and the way Silas had started imitating the mule's bray when he didn't want a bath. Come October, they took the wagon into Bisbee for supplies. Sarai wore a dress with buttons all the way down the back, and Natalia let her pick a tin brooch from the mercantile, a small, pressed daisy with a chipped petal. It cost almost nothing, but Sarai held it like it was gold. At the feed store, a man Natalia didn't recognize tipped his hat and asked if she was Lawson Whitlow's wife. When she said yes, he nodded once, smiled, and said, "Figured. Man talks less now, but he walks taller." On the ride back, Natalia told Lawson what the man had said. Lawson didn't reply, just reached over and laid his hand over hers where it rested in her lap. By winter, the children had learned to read their names, and Natalia had taught them a hymn she remembered from her childhood in Missouri. They sang it quietly in the mornings while sweeping the porch or stirring breakfast. Lawson never joined in, but he listened. One evening, after the first frost dusted the fields, Natalia brought out a quilt she'd been working on since summer. Each square was stitched from something that had belonged to them, a scrap of Lawson's old work shirt, the hem of the dress she'd worn when they arrived, a bit of the children's blankets, worn thin but still soft. She laid it over their bed, and Lawson ran his hand across it like it was something sacred. "You made this with your hands," he said. "I made it with our days." They didn't speak of the past much anymore. Not because it didn't matter, but because it had found its place behind them, quiet, no longer something they had to carry in front. That spring, after the mesquite bloomed and the river ran full for a week straight, Natalia planted a peach pit near the southern edge of the pasture. She didn't know if it would take, but she pressed the earth firm around it and left it to the sun and the rain, Lawson stood beside her afterward, his hand grazing hers. "What's it for?" he asked. She smiled. "For staying." Years passed, measured not by calendars, but by the slow and steady rhythm of a life built from nothing and made whole. One summer, Saraya brought home a wounded jackrabbit and nursed it back to health. Silas grew tall and learned to mend boots. The peach tree bore fruit by the 5th year, sweet and pale and small at first, but perfect all the same. Lawson grew leaner with time, but not slower. Natalia's hands stayed strong, even as the sun creased her face in new ways. They never left the homestead, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't need to. They built a bench beneath the cottonwood tree where they'd made their vows. Most evenings, they ended the day there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the last of the light fade over the hills. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't, but always they sat close. One evening, as the sky deepened and the air cooled, Natalia reached over and took Lawson's hand. "I never thought I'd get to grow old with someone," she said. He looked at her, eyes steady, voice low. "You're not growing old," she raised an eyebrow. "You're just becoming more of yourself," he said. She laughed, then leaned her head against his shoulder. "Well, I like who I'm becoming." "So do I," he said, and kissed her temple. And they sat there, with the wind in the trees and the quiet hum of the land around them. Two people who'd come through fire and thirst and found, at last, what held. They never called it a miracle, they called it theirs.